The wildlife management in Montana has become extremely politicized. Everybody says it should be science-based, but in fact, science takes a deep backseat behind politics. And the state of Montana is basically doing nothing. They said, we're not going to restore wild bison, period. And in terms of controlling the bison that come out of Yellowstone Park, the overall authority is by the Department of Livestock. Their only interest is controlling the number and distribution of bison so that as few as possible come out of the park and they get as little distance from the park as possible.
It's about grass control and greed.
We have the sacred cultural right to hunt, fish, and gather in all usual and accustomed places. The United States government and the state of Montana, they're telling our people when they can hunt and where they can hunt, be in this one little confined space. That's not really hunting.
They're an iconic species, and I think they ought to be managed with the respect that they deserve, and I don't see that happening.
Our bison deserve rights too. They're vital to this ecosystem.
We need to treat it as a national treasure rather than as a problem.
I'm sad with the way that our national parks and our national wildlife refuges have become so politicized. And so under the influence of commercial interests and industrial development.
Buffalo mean a lot to my people and my tribe because a lot of our cultures revolved around them and everything.
They mean a lot to me. Even when I was a kid, learning about our relationship with the bison, how they gave us everything. Like we should be giving our everything to them.
I'm sure that none of the tribal people out there are thrilled about coming out here and shooting, in the situation where they've got. They are limited by what the federal government will allow them to do.
I asked one of our head biologists there for the tribe, this is against our morals and values. Like, why do you agree with these hunts? And she's all, well, if we don't practice them, we lose our treaty rights, which I don't think that's right. Mm-hmm. There's no way we should be able to have our treaty rights diminished just for wanting to protect our resource there. Like,
my feelings are that despite the good efforts of so many well-meaning peoples, things still go astray, and it's a manifest tragedy.
I kind of came to the conclusion after talking to a Blackfoot elder the other day that he said, Edwin, there's one thing you don't understand. The federal government's been pushing us down and pushing us down and pushing us down, for hundreds of years. And, they get to a point where they had to take whatever the government gave them.
I feel like when bison leave the park, they should be left kind of alone, not rounded up for capture or not hunted or anything. Everyone can sit there and blame everyone else, but in reality, it's just this management plan it's not really helping the buffalo.
I talk to a lot of people and tell them, about what's going on and how wrong our hunts are and why we shouldn't be doing it. And they're like, wow, well, I never even knew that. And some of them have gotten some of that bison meat and they're like, it's kind of changed their perspective. And what I've got from quite a few people is if more of the membership knew what was going on and how messed up that hunt is, they wouldn't, be participating in it.
This is a dishonor of Mother Earth, and that's very emotional for me.
There's been a big push by the livestock industry to get rid of brucellosis in cows. And as a result, the feds in the state of Montana want to get rid of brucellosis in bison.
Back in the 90s, the United States Department of Agriculture has a component called APHIS, the Animal Plant Health Inspection Service. And among their responsibilities, they're responsible for controlling brucellosis, for monitoring brucellosis throughout the United States. So in those days, if you found a case of brucellosis in a state, then the whole state you qualified and counted as no longer brucellosis free, and that can cost millions of dollars to the livestock industry. APHIS has changed the regulations. If you identify in a state one cow infected with brucellosis, APHIS does not come in and suddenly declare the entire state no longer brucellosis free. Then that gives more flexibility to allow more bison to leave Yellowstone without risking Montana's brucellosis free designation.
So brucellosis is not necessarily lethal in animals. So in bison, the way it would present itself would be in females. They may have late-term abortions or stillbirth of their calves. That aborted fetus or stillbirth, the placenta and all of those fluids around in and around that are loaded with the bacteria. And so if other bison, which, bison are a very curious species, when they come up to investigate this potential new member of the herd, they can then pick up the bacterium and get the disease. It's worth noting that another species could come by and come across the stillbirth, the afterbirth, or this aborted fetus and also pick up the bacterium.
Yeah, I think that there is perceived risk that is just that. In some cases, perceived. I think there's real risk, but sometimes the perceived risk becomes the reality.
It has been demonstrated that bison can give brucellosis to cattle in controlled environments. To my knowledge, there haven't been any outbreaks in commercial cattle herds around the greater Yellowstone area that have been attributed to a bison infecting cattle.
It's always the other way around, where cattle give bison a disease. There's not one documented case in Canada or the U.S. of a bison giving a disease to a cow.
On the other hand, there's been a lot of cases of brucellosis transmitting between elk and domestic livestock.
Yellowstone's complicated with having brucellosis in the elk population. It's probably a greater threat to local cattle ranchers than bison are.
But elk are not controlled. They wander in and out of the park and beyond the park.
We're shooting and killing bulls and calves, which cannot transmit the disease. The only way a bull can transmit is if he breeds with the cows, and that just doesn't happen unless you're in a confined space. So that is an impossibility, and of course calves aren't mature enough to breed or abort. So either case they can't transmit it. So why are we killing all these bison when their ability to transmit the brucellosis to livestock is, doesn't exist?
We've learned to live with it, with elk transferring brucellosis to cattle. And I don't even know how many cases have been documented in greater Yellowstone now. It grows yearly. So the number of cases are in the 30s or 40s right now. And it did not decimate the livestock industry.
Years ago, I was writing an article about brucellosis and the bison issue, and I called the state veterinarian up, and the secretary said, what do you want to talk? I said, I want to ask about brucellosis, and the state veterinarian got on the phone with me. He says, so where do you live? I said, Livingston, and he assumed I was a rancher. And he said, oh, you don't have to worry about brucellosis and losing your thing, because we can limit it to just a few animals or to one herd or something. At the same time, he was telling publicly the state was going to lose their whole brucellosis-free status. And so that was the first clue that this was sort of a made-up, trumped-up thing.
Quarantine can be a way that we are able to capture bison. We're able to place them into quarantine. We're able to test them. We're able to, if you will, certify them as disease-free so that they can go to other landscapes.
Wildlife managers would typically not relocate wildlife from one area to another knowing that the group of animals have any kind of transmissible disease. That's just a sort of a natural wildlife management strategy.
People think that quarantine is a solution to slaughter, but it's not.
Oh, up on the hill, that's the jail. That's where they jail them for up to 3 years. That, and there's a couple other places up the road.
I think it is harmful, unnecessary, but I understand why it was put in place. But I don't, I think it's cruel. Sometimes we stick our nose in where it doesn't belong. We're basically interrupting the natural migration pattern of bison coming out of the park during the wintertime. We're having an effect. Basically, all that is based on the myth that bison will infect cattle with brucellosis. If it wasn't for that, that probably there would be no need to have that program in place.
People hate capturing animals and sending them to slaughter. It's a way to reduce the number of animals that end up going to the slaughter plants.
I think the quarantine program destroys family groups. It removes buffalo from the ground that they choose to be on. Many buffalo die, get slaughtered through the quarantine process, and that doesn't get talked about enough. Quarantine serves the human more than anything else. It doesn't really serve the buffalo or the wild community that the buffalo are a part of. It's mainly a tool to serve humans, period.
If we say bison can roam north of Yankee Jim Canyon, then we don't have to worry about transporting bison anywhere. Bison are transporting themselves.
Oh, it would have been probably in the 1980s, perhaps. There was a bison that made it all the way past Lima, Montana, and was shot in a place called White Pine Ridge. So, bison have been trying to recolonize this territory for a long time. To treat bison differently than all this other wildlife is the result of a lot of misinformation, for one thing, and political calculus.
The old, outdated management plan for bison sets a population target of, I think, 3,000 bison. And there's more than that. And so every year, the federal government captures and slaughters bison that are not killed by hunters. And they take that meat and they basically give it to the Native Americans.
We experienced it here in Elk Island National Park in Alberta, where we accidentally removed dominant cows from the population that knew where to go and graze during the summer months. We did the removals during the winter. And the consequence of that is that the corporate knowledge within that bison group has been lost as to where those small isolated patches of forage are. And as a result, nobody goes there anymore. And those meadows are growing in and becoming non-grazed by bison, simply because we took that knowledge out of the herd.
Yes, in a lot of ways, bison on private-owned ranches are different because of the way they're managed. They're managed more like domestic livestock. They're confined, they're often fed in the winter, sometimes they're given shots.
I wrote a textbook on wildlife management, and then I began to realize that wildlife management is an oxymoron. The more you manage, the less they're wild. The retention of wildness has become an important issue. A wild population is one that is subjected to a preponderance of natural selection. Preponderant over what? And the answer is two other complex processes. One is called genetic drift. The other I call artificial selection. So the result is a gradual deterioration and simplification of the wild bison genome into something that is a more domesticated animal that is less able to survive in a wild environment and is much more dependent upon us to make up for the inadequacies of the environment. So, among the conservation herds that we have, the Yellowstone herd is certainly the wildest herd we had. Now, to maintain this wildness in any herd, there are two factors involved. One is a larger herd is better, and less human handling and management and control of the animals is better. And the Yellowstone herd wins out over other conservation herds almost hands down. But under modern conditions with small populations on limited ranges, we're going to have to hunt very carefully to minimize our effects in replacing what natural selection's left.
Because they're still continuing to evolve. We need to make sure that that evolutionary process is continuing as unhindered by man as we can, but obviously it's going to be managed intensely.
It's not a hunt. It's not, I wouldn't even call it a slaughter. I'd call it a straight up massacre.
Beady Gulch, well, so Beady Gulch is it's a really disgusting situation. I mean, you're right there on the north boundary of Yellowstone National Park in the Gardner Basin. And literally on the other side of that boundary line is an area called Beady Gulch. And hunters, and this is no joke, I have tons of photos I could share with you, literally line up along the park boundary, waiting for family groups of buffalo to migrate across the boundary. And it's a kind of a bottleneck migration corridor. It's one of the only ways for them to get to other habitat. And these hunters come out and line up and they just wait for the buffalo to cross the boundary line. And as soon as they do, they either try to haze them into an actual hunt zone or they just gun them down.
Bison are basically funneled into a very small area near Beady Gulch where hunters concentrate their efforts. I think that many people, including the ranger staff in Yellowstone National Park, believe that hunters are in danger themselves from the concentration of hunters. There's homes, there's businesses that are located in the area of Beady Gulch. With the hunters around there, I think everyone should be worried about stray bullets.
A lot of people go there during the winter time to go hunt bison there, and it's pretty bad.
It's an active hiking trail and active cross-country ski trails up there. People enjoy that area, and somebody's going to be unsuspecting and come out of the mountains or walk into the gunfire, and they don't know what's happening there, which is concerning.
In my view, it's very disrespectful to the Native Americans to make them hunt on a postage stamp of land right across from these houses. This whole area where they're forced to hunt inside that little piece of Forest Service, it's very dangerous. There's a human health and safety issue, which is my main concern.
So in 2019, we tried to stop it. We did our best. The judges didn't agree with us that there was a risk that a bullet would hit someone. Unfortunately, in 2022 to 2023, over this season, a bullet did strike Jackson Wak Wak. We understand he's a teenager, and from what we can tell, it hit him in the abdomen. We hope he's well and recovering fully. And we do wish him and his family the best. We wish that it hadn't come to this. We wish we were able to do something quicker.
When I saw the herd of about 30 cows and calves, they were all scattered right up here in front of the fire pit. And then we heard 2 pops of gunfire from behind the cabins here, and the whole herd took off running back toward the park boundary. And that's when I ran out the cabin door with my phone to record what was happening.
Multiple
people yelling to stop shooting, and yet the gunfire still continues. They were yelling at each other, "Don't effing shoot me, stop effing shooting," and the firing just kept happening, and the guys kept screaming at each other to stop, and nobody was stopping. And you couldn't see the bison, it was so dark out. All you could do was watch their headlamps, and they were scattered all over the field up there in every which direction. The whole herd was slaughtered. Within a matter of minutes, they were all down and gone, and it was pretty traumatizing.
It also prevents any restoration because the buffalo are never allowed to make it much further than Beady Gulch because there's a wall of guns that they run into.
In the Beady Gulch area, the most dangerous thing is putting lots of people in a small area with guns, shooting at each other.
Everywhere you look around this area, a full circumference, there's Highway 89, there's houses, people living in the houses, school buses going down up the highway, and it's not the kind of place that you want to have a hunt.
It's dangerous to the wildlife as well because with the chaos that comes with, lots of people shooting at the same time comes a lot of injured animals, that wander off and then become either, mortalities in the national park. They can become mortalities along the roadsides. They can become mortalities in people's backyards, things of that nature. And then they become attractants to scavengers and predators. And some of those are very large and threatening to humans.
I had people visiting in 2013 at the end of January, and I always promoted Yellowstone for years prior to that Yellowstone in winter is awesome. Yet I was called by these people after they had a very, very special holiday, and they called me and said, "What is going on here?" And I said, "What do you mean?" They said, "You need to come down here now." And I did. I went down with a friend and saw blood in the road. I saw dead bison right alongside the road. I saw it on the Forest Service in front of my land, which at that time was vacant. The people in the cabin were devastated and said, "If this is the way Montana treats its wildlife, our tourism dollars will not be here." And they left, and they even wrote the governor. And so in 2004 or 5, when I purchased the property, I didn't know.
But all the buffalo who continue to migrate into Montana are getting hammered by hunters less than 3 weeks from calving season. I mean, we're almost into April. We're like there. Full term, and they're still killing pregnant females. There's no respect. There's no honorable harvest. There's no reciprocity.
Just experiencing that when you don't have that expectation, when you think, I'm going to go enjoy the park, I'm going to go see wildlife, I'm hoping to see wolves, and whatever else the beauty that is of Yellowstone. And then that happens. That changes your trip, that changes your day, it changes your life. It really does. There is nothing like winter in Yellowstone. I mean, it is amazing and spectacular. I don't advertise too much to promote that because of what happens across the driveway.
I love wildlife. I took many classes in Yellowstone Park regarding the whole Yellowstone ecosystem, and I loved it. And my passion is to share the wonders of Yellowstone with people, and that's why I have vacation rentals, where we can have people from all over the world visit and enjoy the wonders of Yellowstone.
What happens every year is I hear, oh, this is the worst year ever. This is the worst hunt we've ever seen and experienced.
It was such a shock to me that this was happening literally in front of our driveway.
My dad used to come out in the winter and he would go for walks down the gravel road into the park past Beady Gulch. And one of the first winters he was here, he was coming out and saw a park ranger and there was gunfire, and the ranger told him, get behind the truck. My dad is a Vietnam vet. That created some PTSD for him, and to have to dive behind a truck and not feeling safe to walk in his own neighborhood, essentially.
There were like 3 different groups that were there, and I don't remember the exact number, but I think it was 33 bison that were killed there, and the bullets were flying towards the cabins. They were flying across my land, and there were dead bison right close to my fence line, and I was in shock. It's been devastating, not just for me. They get orphaned, and they look for their mamas, and they can't find them, and they look all over. And they were probably nursing on the night before their mama was killed.
The real reason that bison can't roam free on federal land is because the state and the feds want the private livestock industry to be able to graze cows for very cheap on federal land. If you have a cow and a calf pair on federal land, it costs about $1.41 per month. You take that same cow calf pair and put them on private land, it's going to cost between $20 and $30. And so it's a huge handout, it's a subsidy, but the livestock industry can never say that they're taking handouts from the feds, so they have to make an excuse, and that excuse is essentially this idea that there's this disease called brucellosis and we got to stop it.
They're smart enough to know that if there were a lot of bison on public land, and bison and cattle overlap a lot in dietary preferences, that if it comes push to shove and there's overlap, and for some reason we have to reduce the herds that are likely the public is going to want to see reduced are the domestic, privately owned livestock rather than the bison. And I think that the ranching community is perceptive enough to know that they don't want to go there and they don't want to have that battle.
They're a really unique wildlife resource, and more should be done to cultivate that resource.
Matt came to me and he said, look, there's this article I read about this horrible bison slaughter that happens right on the edge of Yellowstone National Park. And I think we should find a solution that makes the situation better, not only for the people who live there, but also for the bison. So we sought initially a preliminary injunction and temporary restraining order. And most people know those from domestic violence situations where you get a temporary restraining order to stop somebody from doing something initially, to stop them from harming someone when you think that there's something dangerous going on. And here, we thought the danger was really pretty obvious. So what happened as we dug into this, we learned that in 2000, the agencies had completed one analysis. This environmental impact statement forces the agency to take a hard look at the environmental impacts of what they're doing. It's going to analyze all of the impacts. So bison are a really integral part of the entire ecology of North America. The agencies had completed one analysis, but they had never done another one. And in the meantime, the way that the agencies managed the bison here had changed significantly. And we filed actually here in Washington, D.C., which this district court denied the temporary restraining order. So then it got transferred to Billings. So the court denied the preliminary injunction. And the slaughter went forward over the winter of 2019 to 2020. And then the agency started gathering the documents. So we started getting our briefs together. And in the summer of last year, the United States agencies, the Forest Service and the Park Service, told us, all right, we will go do this additional analysis. Indeed, we planned to start this a long time ago, and we're gonna do it. We're not convinced that the agencies are actually gonna do it. Your Honor, would you please issue a deadline? We think 2 years is a completely reasonable amount of time for them to do this. They've already started some analyses. So we said, do the analysis on a deadline, pick up the bison guts, and move the hunt out of Beady Gulch. The Fed says, no, we don't want to do any of that. So we waited for the district judge, and she took about 4 months, and she said, nope, I'm just gonna do nothing. And that's when we realized that we weren't gonna get any results from the United States District Court, from Judge Waters. And so last year we appealed to the appellate court. So instead of one judge, they sit in panels of 3.
Given that the claims we were seeking were only temporary at best, we agreed to drop those 2 claims and move forward with the most important claim and the strongest claim on appeal, which was with our delay claim. Only 2 weeks before the argument, the agencies finally issued a notice publicly that they were going to, in fact, do the environmental review and that they were going to complete that review within 2 years. So the oral argument occurred in February of 2022. The argument went very well. The court was extremely sympathetic.
Okay. So you don't have to convince me that the government has treated your clients pretty badly, and that the government delayed unconscionably in starting this whole process, and that if you hadn't started your lawsuit, we would still be waiting for the publication of this notice?
The decision was, on its surface, a bit disappointing. What the court said was that they were going to give this administration another opportunity to complete the review on the agency's timeline. Since that opinion, we've had some other factual developments. One of the developments is the threatened or endangered species listing. The other development is that there was a major flood in Yellowstone in the summer of 2022. And the agencies have said in their most recent report to the district court that that's going to delay their analysis of all of these issues involving hunting in Beady Gulch. And they've requested additional time. So already we have delays, and the word of the DOJ attorney that was taken by the Ninth Circuit panel has not held up.
It's April 5th, 2023, and I'm here to give an update on the status of the Yellowstone wild bison. So it's been a pretty brutal year this year. The Park Service has calculated that Yellowstone National Park can support up to 10,000 wild bison. Last year they had about 6,000 bison living there, and it's been a hard winter. It's been very cold. There's been a lot of snow. So they've been migrating north through this bottleneck at Beady Gulch. The people just sit and wait for them. So out of that 6,000 population, at a meeting in the fall, the Interagency Bison Management Plan all decided that they were going to continue. So I have their recent numbers here. The National Park Service said, well, we definitely want to remove less than 25%, because when we remove more than 25%, it starts to impact the population itself in some negative ways. Despite those numbers, the people in Beady Gulch have killed almost 1,100 wild bison. The Park Service has culled several hundred more. They've also put several hundred in holding, and so they have removed from the wild bison population 2,318 bison this year. Now that's a far more than the 25% target the Park Service identified. It's more than either of the tribes had intended to take. It just shows the tragedy that's really happening in Beady Gulch.
I think there needs to be wild bison in Montana, period. I mean, and effectively we don't have that. If we could focus on where do the risks lie, where are the opportunities, how do we satisfy livestock or ranching interests while also providing the opportunity for wild bison to exist in Montana, I think we could arrive at solutions pretty quickly.
The thing is that there really are solutions, and it gets complicated, but it's not complicated for me as someone who likes to eat bison and wants to live a modern traditional life. We have to protect and honor the bison.
If we could put in some kind of a system so that hunting was my term, regulated. So bison could actually get outside of the park and they could be hunted on a larger landscape. I think that would solve a lot of the safety problems that we have. Bison also would not have a learned behavior, but to not go past that boundary where they would make themselves available for hunting. So I think there are some things that can be done.
Is we need to educate people, especially, our tribal membership here that are for those hunts, Tell them we need to bring back our traditional morals and our traditional values and, put those foremost before our treaty rights. Those have been there before treaties. Even fight for our treaty rights. Say, no, we're not going to lose our rights. It's just unethical, so we're putting that on the back burner for now. Our most important thing we need to do is gain bison their rights and freedoms that they deserve.
There are other management options available, including direct transfer of bison to tribes, transfer of bison to other federal lands that the agencies have not considered because it's either too difficult or too expensive.
Well, I think tribal lands, both in the U.S. and in Canada, are one of the best hopes for getting a large number of bison back out on the landscape. We work with the state already in the Forest Service already on things like hunting seasons around wolves and elk. Why treat bison any different?
To me, the answer is to expand the habitat of a naturally occurring species into the national parks, which is our federal land.
I think they should be on all suitable public land. And obviously there are some limitations. You have to have a large area and so forth. But we have large parts of the West, I believe, that once were home to bison, that could be home to bison again. The most obvious one is the Charles M. Russell Wildlife Refuge.
The Custer Gallatin National Forest land in Montana. There's a habitat there for it, and I don't think it would compete against cattle.
So if we can get more bison on federal land all across the state of Montana, we're going to open up amazing opportunities for people who come from all over the world to hunt bison when it's safe and when there's more opportunities. So it makes economic sense for the state, it makes safety sense for everyone else, it makes good biological sense for bison. It's a win for everyone involved.
People don't come to Montana to watch cattle get slaughtered or look at cows in the field. They come to Montana to see wolves and grizzly bears. If you go to Yellowstone, you just see these piles of people with thousands and thousands of dollars of camera equipment are just waiting for a chance to get close to a wolf or a bison.
I think every option should be tried. I don't think that there's a cure-all, one option, to satisfy everybody.
I think they deserve better than what they're getting.
Some of it is learned. If you want to get a promotion, you work hard, you don't rock the boat, don't make any changes, don't do anything drastic.
If we followed the instructions of our elders and we had more respect for bison and one another. Now, I'm sounding preachy. I don't know how to make people respect each other.
If we can't have wildlife on federal land, where can we have them? It's crazy what they're doing.
This is our national animal. It's an animal that's genetically unique, and we need to treat it as a national treasure rather than as a problem.
So the human mind is the obstacle. There's so many ways that we could change our behavior that would make things better for not only the buffalo, but for many other wildlife species.
Bison can provide benefits that cattle can't. Just the way they graze the landscape. But in addition, sort of the secondary, sort of hidden benefits of having bison on the landscape are their hair, for example. Lots of stuff in the media these days about shed bison hair being conducive to the increased survival of migratory songbirds, for example, or small mammals. They use that hair in their nests, and it provides olfactory masking to hide the smell of the nest and eggs from passing noses of coyotes and badgers and whatnot.
It's not surprising in some ways that it's been difficult for the agencies to do something about this problem. But the answer is not to further delay making a decision, because not making a decision, in fact, is making a decision. It's making a decision not to do anything, to leave a broken policy in place, and not to come up with better alternatives that might actually be better for all of the parties involved in the long term.
If we could just get back to maybe not being angry, but celebratory at how beautiful America is, how beautiful the bison are.
Ultimately, the feds have the power to do what is right for the United States people, do what is right for everyone, and not just what is right for the livestock industry.
Well, anyone who knows me knows I always say in every challenge there's an opportunity. And I want to create a 5-star win. The 5 stars. The first one, of course, is for our wildlife, meaning not just the bison, our whole Yellowstone ecosystem. And the second is for the Native Americans. And I want for them to be respected and to have the right to have bison on their own property, not to have to come to a postage stamp area amongst 55 gunners shooting at habituated animals. And the state of Montana is my 3rd star. And I love Montana. And I feel that with the ability to have a broader landscape for the bison, that we will have the ability to have them on lands where the babies can be born wild. And when they're harvested, and the state of Montana can receive huge amount of money for licenses to obtain the right to harvest a bison, and have, again, a fair chase and a safe and ethical hunt. And the 4th star is the safety for my neighbors. I have neighbors selling their house. They've taken off in their vehicles to stay away until in April when they can come back and know that this slaughter is not happening. The 5th is the most important for me because I asked God decades ago, why was I allowed that land in my lifetime? And it was answered. It was to be a voice for the animals that cannot speak. I'm just one little voice. This isn't about Bonnie Lynn. My purpose is to ask you to be a voice so that through our films, through our website, we can make a difference for our entire Yellowstone ecosystem and our wildlife.
And if we could be more respectful of their ways of being, I think so many people, millions of people agree, not just Indians.
And we have to acknowledge that we'll never be able to meet the desires of the people that have perspectives at the extreme ends. Like the only solution is millions of bison on the landscape, or the only solution is all the bison have to stay in the national park. We have to find some sort of middle ground.
But a lot of us still do have our traditional morals and values. So I believe, if we could educate people is the main thing. We need to educate people to let them know what's going on. They're so vital to the ecosystem. They're such like a nutritional animal, and just how we're going about it isn't right.